Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. I'm Brian Kelly, the CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for tuning in today. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Communications. We appreciate you joining us. So, Brian, 4 years ago today marks the declaration of the pandemic.
Yeah, this was we marked this mainly because it was the birth of the Small Business Briefing, this briefing that we were doing daily at that time. Rob Fowler and I in the SBAM Founders Conference Room just did a briefing and started this whole process. Hard to believe that was 4 years ago. And so when I noted that anniversary, and this was like the official international declaration that COVID-19 is a pandemic, and it just started one of the most uh, I don't know what to even call it, one of the most substantial time periods in modern American history or world history, and really in a lot of ways still kind of dealing with ramifications, and the world changed quite a bit, and including the way that we operate here at SBAM. So it seemed like it made sense to just acknowledge that the we think about some of our policy work that's happening too. We work on all the normal stuff that we've always worked on, business issues, but the learning loss that occurred during the pandemic and really inspired SBAM to step up its work in the K-12 space so that the next generation can be ready to compete and win in a 21st century global economy that's going to require more of them than ever. And yet we've really been struggling to get the K-12 system back on track. So you see a lot of our time, attention, focus is there, and really because of some of the lingering impacts that that we're still feeling in terms of the pandemic. So it's been 4 years. Boy, time flies.
It sure does. Time flies. My son was in kindergarten 4 years ago, and so kindergarten to fourth grade, that's a huge leap. So we mark time, by the school year at our house, and it's just amazing to think that it has been 4 years. It kind of feels like yesterday and a decade ago at the same time. But today is another momentous day, and that's because independent contractor rules have changed, and people really do need to pay attention because they changed today, March 11th.
Yeah, so back in January, we informed our audience that the U.S. Department of Labor. It's hard to keep track of this stuff because you got a state Department of Labor, you got a state legislature that's proposed things, you got things proposed in Congress, and you got the U.S. Department of Labor. In this case, what we're talking about are changes that the U.S. Department of Labor are applying, and they apply nationwide. And those new rules are going into effect. The effective date is today, so March 11th, and this is the date. If you have not reviewed your independent contractor status, just the new rules and the standards compared to the work arrangements and the scenario that you use independent contractors under, I would implore you to please do that. The phrase that they use when they're investigating these issues is payroll fraud. That's what they call it in the government agencies. And it's not really clear yet how how strictly they will enforce and how much of the gray area that they'll get into. But the posture has been pretty aggressive in these areas in recent years. And so that's why I just really think it makes sense, even if you don't make any changes, just to look at your rules or look at your situations and compare to the rules. Make sure you feel good justifying that. We do have an article that's shared in the comments. That article will go over what the new standards are. There's a link in there as well to FAQs, frequently asked questions, at the U.S. Department of Labor website. There's lots of them in there. Actually, I found them to be helpful. A lot of questions that I had regarding it. They went through scenarios. So you can garner quite a lot of information by looking at it, but still, we just one thing that we can't tell is how aggressive they'll be in the application. So let me just run through the six-part test. There's a six-part test now. that will be applied. And if you haven't looked at them yet, they're kind of frustrating in that they're not bright lines. These are not the sorts of things where it's like, yeah, we're definitely on this side of the line, or definitely on that side of the line. And none of these are any more important than any of the others. According to the rules, all of these factors count, and any one of the factors could put a person outside of independent contractor status. So the contractor's opportunity for profit or loss depending on managerial skill. So if the person can make more or less based on how good they are at doing it, that's one of the factors. The investments by the worker and the potential employer. So are they essentially, this is the old equipment test. Are they using the business's equipment? Are they using their own equipment to do the job? Degree of permanence of the work relationship. So how long have they been? Again, a lot of these are frustrating. Like the idea of a long-term business relationship counts against you if you're an independent, if you're an entrepreneur that just sells your services. Long-term relationships count against you. And then nature and degree of control. This is talking about the work or the work product. So do you as the business control what is the nature and degree of control over the work? It could be scheduled, but they make it really clear that it's not just talking about the schedule. And then like when the work gets done. Extent of number 5, extent to which the work performed is an integral part of the employer's business. Again, what does that really mean? Is the work integral to the employer's business? It's really nonsense that that's one of the, because why would you hire somebody to do something that's not important to your business? Anyway, and then skill and initiative being a 6th. That's actually the new one that's kind of added in compared to the rules from the Obama administration. So you've had a pendulum that's gone kind of back and forth. These rules, with the exception of the 6th one, which is new, are from are basically look like the rules from the Obama administration. The Trump administration had the bright line rules, easier to qualify as an independent contractor, and you just knew, you stand on this side of the line and you're good. Now it's back to the more subjective rules. But what has changed is the posture of the regulatory agencies. They're much more aggressive in their posture and the phrasing that they're using, the way they're presenting. And so that's why I'm a little nervous that people look at it and say, well, I've operated under these rules before, and I was just fine. It makes sense to look at it again, make sure that you can justify how you're doing it now. Please take a look at the article that was shared. It has some helpful links in it. And as always, if you have any questions, email us at sbam@sbam.org. But also want to remind you, for those who have premium level memberships or higher at SBAM, Ask an Expert. That is a feature of your membership with us. Please do feel free to utilize that. And questions like these, like, hey, I've got this independent contractor situation, I'm not really sure where it fits. So it'd be a good circumstance to remind you that you have that service available to you.
All right, good plug. I was prepared to say those very words, Brian. So you beat me to it. All right, last week there was a decision from the Court of Appeals, a ruling on income tax rate. What can you tell us?
Yeah, we've talked a little bit about this going back a little over a year. So last year, the state was concerned that the increase in revenue coming into the state was going to trigger an automatic reduction in the income tax rate. That is in fact what happened. It went from 4.25 down to 4.05%. An argument ensued among the policymakers on whether or not this was permanent or not. And the decision of Treasury, based on an Attorney General opinion, said, nope, it's just a temporary decrease. It'll go down for a year and then it'll pop back up to 4.25. There was a lawsuit. The Mackinac Center and a couple of state legislators and Associated Builders and Contractors filed a lawsuit, and that went to the first went to the Court of Claims and then to the Court of Appeals. The Court of Appeals has ruled in favor of the state, saying that the rate will go back to four, or what already has gone back to 4.25, and that was legal for it to go back to 4.25. Basically, what this decision came down to, was an interpretation on a formula inside the law. And the formula inside the law basically talked about the circumstances under which the rate gets reduced. And you start with the current rate. So what does current rate mean? And what the kind of pro-taxpayer, pro-tax cut side of the argument was, that current rate means, look up the rate, whatever it is now, that's the current rate. Kind of a layman's term. Like, of course, current rate means the rate that it is now. But what the government said was, no. See, that law passed at a particular point in time, and current rate always means the rate it was back when the rate passed, not the idea that it's dynamic and it changes in the future. And so what the Court of Appeals said was that that was a reasonable interpretation. And this really kind of gives you a sense for what the power of the executive branch can interpret things. And unless there's courts will typically defer to an executive branch if they have what they consider to be a reasonable interpretation of the law. So in this case, I saw it as, in the beginning, was, well, you can't say that current means previous, because that's what they're arguing. The current, when they say current rate, it actually means the previous rate. And what the state said was, no, that's not it. It's the current rate, but the current rate as of the date that the law passed. And that means it will always reset. And the court said that's a reasonable interpretation. And as I go back and reread it, while I think it's still a stretch, but it is something that you could read it that way, and the court is going to allow it. Now, it will be appealed to the Supreme Court. The plaintiffs in the case have indicated that they intend to appeal it to the Supreme Court. I really don't see the Supreme Court overturning it, especially looking at the panel of judges at the Court of Appeals 3-0 decision. And so I would say that while we will note what happens when it goes through that process, I would say don't hold your breath for the rate to go back down to 4.05%.
All right, thanks for the update there. Now it is Monday, and typically you would have a Data Monday report for us, but we're still waiting for some data points to be released yet this week. So Brian, what do you anticipate being released this week? What are you on the lookout for?
Yeah, so we're not going to do one today because so many data points come out yet this week. Just kind of the way that the Mondays fall. Sometimes it falls well, and sometimes it doesn't. But really, the big one that everybody's waiting for is inflation. Inflation will determine what happens with some of the other policy decisions, fiscal policy decisions, especially interest rates. So I had covered last week some of the comments made by Jerome Powell, the chair of the Federal Reserve Board of Directors. And I'm kind of reading between the lines, but he seemed to be walking things back a little bit in terms of interest rate cut expectations, which means that he's more afraid of inflation than he is of recession. And so I doubt that those words would have been spoken if he didn't have some insight into what the February numbers were going to look like. And so I kind of expect it to be a level type, like no more progress made on inflation, and still some, because of employment constraints or employment shortages, that there's still upward pressure, especially on core inflation, the ones that are tied into employment pretty solidly. So I'm kind of expecting a status quo type of an inflation report, one where doesn't look like it's getting worse, but it doesn't look like it's getting better in that way. And so if it's not continuing to go down toward that 2%, they'll hold the fiscal policies where they are. So yeah, that's what I'm expecting. That's the big one. There's some other consumer sentiment indexes come out this week. U of M's consumer confidence report comes out, and I'm a big fan of U of M's consumer confidence report because it's like the way the economy goes is really it really does depend on how people are feeling, and so we'll see how they're feeling now as we get a little further um, into this year. So no data report today, but there'll probably be a pretty big one on Monday.
All right, well, that is everything we have. It's a quick show today. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back here Thursday at 3 p.m. Have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, everybody. See you on Thursday.